For years, her parents ignored her wins to coddle her brother's illness. Then came her wedding, the missing invitations, and the secret confession that tore the family apart. You ever stand at the altar looking out at a sea of smiling faces and realize the people who should have been there, your own flesh and blood, aren't, and for the first time it feels like peace instead of pain? That's the moment I knew my past didn't own me anymore, but man, getting there? That was a battlefield of betrayal I never saw coming. Growing up, I used to believe my family was pretty normal, the kind of middle-class suburban life that's nothing flashy but still feels secure, with backyard barbecues and birthday banners hung crooked in the dining room, and for a while, that's what it was, or at least what I thought it was. I was the oldest, 3 years ahead of my little brother Neil, and for the first 9 years of my life, we were just two kids sharing toys and teasing each other under the same roof. But everything shifted the day Neil got diagnosed with asthma. Now look, asthma's a real condition. I'm not saying it's nothing, but Neil's case? It was mild. His doctor said so, and I remember that clearly because my parents' reaction was anything but mild. It was like someone flipped a switch and turned my kid brother into a glass doll, fragile and all-consuming, while I just faded into the wallpaper. From that point forward, every cough from Neil became a 5-alarm fire, and suddenly, nothing else in our lives mattered, not school plays, not report cards, not birthdays. Just Neil and his inhaler. I remember this one winter concert when I was 12. I had this solo piece on the piano I'd practiced for months, the kind of music that made your fingers cramp from hours at the keys, but it felt worth it because my parents promised they'd be there. That morning, they even joked about sitting front row. But by nightfall, all I had was an empty seat and a rushed voicemail saying Neil had an episode. Later, my grandma told me she called the house that same evening and heard Neil yelling at a video game in the background. I didn't even know what to feel, anger, embarrassment, maybe both, but mostly I felt like I didn't exist. Then came my 16th birthday, the one my grandparents flew in from Florida to help celebrate, bringing balloons and stories from their condo near Clearwater. My parents were supposed to pick up the cake and decorations, but they vanished for hours because Neil had some allergic reaction that turned out to be seasonal sniffles. By the time they got back, the party was over. The custom cake was half-eaten, Neil had devoured most of it in the hospital waiting room, and I sat there with a slice and a hollow feeling I couldn't shake. High school was just more of the same. I became valedictorian, not just top of my class, but perfect GPA, volunteer hours, all that, and my parents didn't come to the ceremony. Not because they forgot or had to work, but because Neil was anxious about his finals. Finals that weren't even until the next week. I gave my speech staring into strangers' faces while my best friend's parents clapped loud enough to fill the silence where mine should have been. By the time I hit college, I'd stopped expecting anything. I worked weekends at a diner and nights in a lab, scraping by while my parents funneled every spare cent into Neil's college fund just in case he needed medical help. Meanwhile, Neil was posting hiking photos on Instagram, barely using his inhaler and acting like the picture of health. But whenever anything good happened in my life, like earning my master's degree or publishing a paper, it was like someone hit a mute button in our house. I could scream those achievements at the top of my lungs and all they'd hear was Neil sneezing in the next room. The thing that finally broke me wasn't one big moment, it was death by 1,000 paper cuts. When Jamie, my now husband, proposed after years of steady, unwavering love, we started planning the kind of wedding that I never thought I'd get to have. And as much as it hurt to admit it, I knew deep down that I couldn't invite the people who raised me because they wouldn't let that day be mine. I didn't want another milestone turned into a Neil show with my mom rushing out mid-vows because he had a headache or my dad pacing the lobby to check on some flare-up. I wanted peace and Jamie, bless him, understood. So we planned the wedding without them, just us, his incredible family, and the people who had actually been there for me. I won't lie, it ate at me for weeks. I stared at our guest list, hoping I'd suddenly feel different. But every time I imagined them there, I saw empty chairs and last-minute exits and heard Neil coughing louder than our vows. I made my choice, and when the day came, it was the most peaceful I've ever felt. Until the texts started. The morning after our wedding, I woke up with sunlight pouring through the hotel window and Jamie still asleep beside me. His arm draped over my shoulder like it had always belonged there. For a moment, I felt like I had finally crossed some invisible line. Left all that old hurt behind and stepped into the kind of peace I used to think only existed in stories. But peace, it turns out, is fragile. And it didn't last long. I don't know exactly when the first message came in. Maybe while we were cutting the cake. Maybe during our first dance. But by the time I checked my phone the next day, it was lit up like a Christmas tree. Texts, voicemails, even a couple of emails. All of them from family members who'd somehow found out I hadn't invited my parents or Neil. The words selfish, spiteful, and disrespectful came up more than once. All from people who hadn't called me in years, who hadn't shown up to a single recital, graduation, or moving day. My mother's message hit the hardest. She said, "You've always resented Neil for things he can't control. I didn't raise you to be this cruel." Cruel. That was the word that stuck in my throat like a piece of glass. And maybe, for a split second, I believed her. But that passed as fast as it came. What they didn't know, what none of them seemed to remember, was how many times I'd been the one left behind. They didn't remember the scholarship I had to turn down because Neil had surgery the same week, only to later learn it was an outpatient mole removal. They didn't remember how he cried panic attack the night of my first big research presentation, and my parents left halfway through, saying, "He needs us more right now." But the real gut punch came a few days later. Jamie's mom, sweet woman, 30-plus years as a pediatric nurse, had tried to do what I couldn't. She reached out to my mother, hoping to broker some kind of peace. I hadn't asked her to, but I wasn't mad about it either. Deep down, I guess I hoped that hearing from someone outside the family might wake my mother up. Didn't. Jamie's mom told me afterward that she tried to explain how Neil's symptoms didn't quite add up, how his chronic asthma didn't seem to stop him from weekend hikes, late-night parties, or running a 10K last month. She said she spoke gently, with compassion, just trying to open a door. My mom slammed it in her face, literally hung up the phone mid-sentence, then called Jamie's sister to complain that she was interfering in family matters. That's when something shifted in me. Not anger, no, that had long since burned out. It was clarity, cold and sharp and final. My mom wasn't just blind to what was happening. She was part of it. She wasn't just enabling Neil's behavior. She was feeding it. And like a broken dam, the memories came flooding in. I thought about the night of my high school homecoming, how I saved for months to buy that red dress with my own money. I'd been nominated for court, something I never thought would happen. And the plan was simple. Photos, dinner, then the dance. But 2 hours before the event, Neil had abdominal pain, and off to the ER they went. I sat in that dress for hours, phone in hand, waiting for a text that never came. Diagnosis? Gas. Just plain gas. I ended up taking the dress off without ever stepping outside. Jamie held my hand while I told him this, nodding in that quiet way he does when words aren't enough. His eyes didn't show pity, they showed understanding. That's the thing about Jamie. He doesn't need to say much to make you feel safe. And that's more than I can say for the people who raised me. That week, the support from Jamie's family never wavered. His dad toasted me like I was his own daughter, listing my achievements one by one at a post-wedding dinner they threw just for me. His sisters hugged me tight, his mom brought me tea, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Still, something inside me couldn't rest, because I knew what was coming next. My parents weren't going to let this go quietly, and I was right. They started telling people Neil had been hospitalized from the stress of being excluded from the wedding. Severe anxiety, they claimed. Couldn't breathe. Our visit. But my cousin Kay, bless her heart, called me later that night and said she saw Neil that very same day. Not in a hospital, not in bed. At a baseball game. Laughing, drinking, and very much not gasping for air. And that's when Kay told me something I'd never heard before. Something that changed everything. Kay's voice trembled a little when she said it, and I could tell she hadn't been planning to tell me. Not yet, maybe not ever. But something about the way I sounded on the phone must have cracked her open. She said she'd been holding this in for years, trying not to take sides, trying to keep peace where peace never really existed. But after what happened with the wedding, she couldn't keep quiet anymore. She said, "Neil told me once that he faked a lot of it. The attacks, the symptoms, the timing of it all." I just sat there with the phone pressed to my ear like it had grown roots in my hand. My mouth went dry. I remember the clock ticking on the wall above the fridge and the sound of Jamie in the next room humming to himself while folding laundry, completely unaware that my entire world was about to tilt sideways. Faked it. Neil faked it. Not just once, not just a little. Over and over. For years. to steal attention, to derail my moments, to make sure I never had more than he did. According to Kay, it started when they were around 13, back during a family gathering at our aunt's lake house. Neil had snuck some beer from the cooler, and later that night, after a few too many, he told her how easy it was to get our parents to drop everything. He said it was like a game, watching how fast they'd run if he claimed to feel dizzy, or short of breath, or anxious. And when I had something going on, something big, he'd make sure to time it just right. He was jealous, Kay said. Jealous that I was good at things, jealous that people looked at me when I walked in a room, jealous that I was always doing something that made people proud even if our parents never showed it. And he knew exactly how to steal the spotlight back. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch the wall. But mostly, I just felt hollow. Kay didn't stop there. She said she had something else to show me, something that would erase any lingering doubt I had about whether I'd done the right thing by cutting them out of my wedding. Something she never wanted to believe was real until she saw it with her own eyes. A few days before the wedding, she said, my mom had sent her a text, one she thought was harmless at first. It was about keeping an eye on Neil during the ceremony. But the more Kay read, the more sinister it became. My mom was actively planning to create a distraction. She mentioned maybe Neil could feel unwell halfway through the vows, or that he might need to step outside just in case people forgot what was really important. Let that sink in. Before they even knew they weren't invited, my own mother was plotting how to sabotage my wedding day with another one of Neil's phantom crises. Kay forwarded the texts to me. I read them over and over, each line digging a little deeper into the scar tissue I'd spent years trying to pretend wasn't there. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't just feel hurt, I felt betrayed. I felt rage. Real, sharp, cut through you like ice rage. And then, just like that, the puzzle pieces started locking into place. All the events, the missed moments, the cold shoulders, the gaslighting, the years of being called dramatic or selfish any time I asked for even a shred of attention. None of it was accidental. None of it was just bad timing or misunderstandings. It was a pattern. A system. A whole damn playbook written behind my back. The homecoming night with the dress that never left the hanger? Neil knew. The science scholarship I had to turn down? Neil knew. Every time I cried in silence because someone else had taken what was supposed to be mine, he was behind it, pulling strings with my parents cheering him on from the sidelines. I spent the next few hours talking with Kay, going back through our childhoods like we were detectives unraveling a cold case. She reminded me of the time I was supposed to sing solo at a community event, something I'd practiced for weeks, and how Neil sprained his ankle at a family picnic just hours before. He walked just fine the next day. Or the summer I got into that elite science program, but couldn't go because Neil suddenly had a flare-up that demanded all our parents' attention for weeks. She remembered it all. And she said she was sorry for staying silent. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, Jamie's hand loosely wrapped around mine, and I thought about what kind of person I might have become if I'd been given just a little bit of what Neil got. A little attention. A little support. A little protection from the people who were supposed to lift me up instead of holding me down. And just when I thought it couldn't get heavier, the next morning came with another twist. Neil had finally responded. Not to me directly, but through a message Kay forwarded. And what he said in that message made my stomach drop all over again. When Kay sent me the screenshot, I swear I stared at the words so long I forgot to blink. It was from Neil, sent late at night, probably one of those moments when guilt creeps in after you think everyone else is asleep. There was no grand excuse, no angry denial, no attempt to spin things. Just the truth, raw and ugly and decades late. He wrote, I know what Mom said about the wedding. I saw the texts. I didn't know she sent them, but once Kay showed me, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I know I hurt you. I know I've done it for a long time. That was how it began. He admitted everything. He said that when we were kids, he figured out being sick got him things. Not toys or candy, but affection, attention, control. Said he could practically see the switch flip in Mom and Dad when he clutched his chest or said he couldn't breathe. And after a while, it just became the easiest way to feel important. But it didn't stop with childhood. He wrote about high school, about faking those panic attacks every time I had something going on, concerts, ceremonies, college interviews. Said he told himself it wasn't hurting anyone because you were strong and I wasn't. That line hit me harder than I expected. Because for years I had been strong. Not because I wanted to be, but because no one gave me the option to fall apart. Neil said he started therapy recently, not for me, not even for the wedding, but because the anxiety he'd been pretending to have for years had somehow become real. All those lies, all that manipulation, it caught up with him. He didn't know how to exist without being the center of concern. Said he was tired of being the sick one even when he wasn't. Then came the part that really broke me. When Kay showed me the texts from Mom, I felt sick. Not just because of what she said, but because I knew it wouldn't be the first time she planned something like that. I always thought I was the manipulator, but I wasn't alone. I played the part, but she wrote the script. That line, it changed everything. See, I had spent most of my life thinking my brother was the sole problem. That his jealousy, his neediness, his constant shadowing of my milestones was the weight I carried. But reading that message, it finally clicked. This wasn't just about Neil. This was about our parents. Especially our mother. She didn't just let it happen, she encouraged it. She nurtured it. She fed his dependence and weaponized it every time she sensed I was rising above. And suddenly, I wasn't just angry at Neil anymore. I was furious with her. Jamie read the message with me. He didn't say much at first. Just held my hand, rubbing his thumb across my knuckles like he was grounding me in the moment. Then he looked at me and said, "You know this isn't your burden to carry anymore, right?" But it still felt like it was. Even after the wedding. Even after the lies fell apart. Neil ended his message asking if we could meet for coffee, somewhere neutral, somewhere quiet. Said he didn't expect forgiveness. He just wanted to try to be something better than what he'd been. Part of me wanted to say yes. The other part? Still didn't trust him enough to be in the same room. And just when I thought that was enough drama for 1 week, the final domino dropped. Kay called again. She said my parents found out about Neil's apology and they lost it. Apparently, Neil had been staying at their house for a few weeks while looking for a full-time job. He left his email open on their desktop. My mother read his entire message chain with Kay. She went ballistic. Said Neil was betraying the family and my father even threatened to cut him off completely if he didn't set the record straight. That's when I found out Neil's independence wasn't real. His apartment? Paid for by them. His car? In Dad's name. His job at the startup? A favor from one of Mom's church friends. He'd built his life on their financial lifeline and now, by siding with me, he was risking it all. But here's the part that stunned me. He didn't back down. He told them he was done lying. Said he was getting out, planning to move to a smaller place, work full-time, and figure out what it meant to really stand on his own. Kay said he packed his bags and left that night, said he'd rather sleep on a friend's couch than go back to being their puppet. I didn't know whether to feel proud or numb. For years, I'd begged for recognition, for accountability, for even a flicker of truth. Now I had it. But it didn't erase the damage. It didn't take back the years I spent trying to earn the kind of love that was given away for free to someone who lied to get it. I told Jamie I'd meet Neil. One time. In a public place. Not for closure. Not for reconciliation. Just to see, for myself, if the man who stole my childhood milestones could ever become the brother I never really had. It was one of those rainy afternoons where the sky looks like it's stuck in perpetual dusk, the kind of gray that settles over everything like a heavy coat you didn't ask to wear, and I remember thinking, yeah, this fits. Jamie offered to come with me to sit a few tables away just in case I needed an exit or backup or anything, really, but I told him no. This was something I had to face alone. We picked a neutral spot, some little cafe in the middle of town with chipped wooden tables, the kind where nobody looks twice at two siblings sitting across from each other not saying a word. I got there early. Neil was 10 minutes late. When he walked in, I saw him hesitate at the door like he almost turned around. But he didn't. He walked in, ordered a coffee black, and sat down across from me like a stranger rehearsing how to say sorry for the first time in his life. He looked tired. Not physically, not in the way a lack of sleep shows, but in a way that sinks into your bones when the lies you lived on start to crumble. He didn't touch his coffee. Just kept one hand around the cup like it grounded him. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," I answered and let the silence stretch out between us. There was no small talk. No fake laughs. No "have you been" fluff to fill the gaps. Just two people sitting in the ruins of a relationship that had never been built on solid ground. He started with what I'd already read, how he'd faked it, how he fed off the attention, how he figured if he could keep being the center of their world, he didn't have to compete with me. He said it all again, out loud this time, and hearing it wasn't easier. It hurt more. "You knew," I said finally, my voice lower than I meant it to be. "You knew I was alone. Every time they missed something important. Every time I sat in a crowd of strangers looking for two faces that never came. You knew." He nodded. "Yeah, I knew." I wish I could tell you I screamed at him. Threw the coffee across the room. Told him off in some righteous speech that made him squirm. But the truth is, I just sat there with tears burning behind my eyes, blinking too fast and breathing too slow because even now, even after everything, I still wanted to believe he was worth saving. He said our parents weren't just enablers, they were architects. That after every episode, Mom would praise him for being brave, for making it through, for needing her. Said she'd bring him little gifts after doctor visits, even when they were just checkups. Dad gave him rides to school when I was walking 2 miles in winter. But the worst part? When you got into that summer science program, Neil said, his voice barely above a whisper, I heard Mom telling Dad we had to keep you home. That family needed to stay close. And I knew then that all I had to do was say I didn't feel well and you wouldn't go. My stomach turned. That program was everything to me at 16. A stepping stone, a dream, a taste of the life I'd spent years trying to reach. And in 1 week, it vanished. I remembered begging them, saying I'd take the bus, I'd stay with a host family, I'd call every night. But no. Neil needed support. They said it wasn't the right time. Neil sat back and covered his face with his hands. I don't know how to undo any of it. I told him he couldn't. There's no undo button on childhood. No magic fix for a decade of damage. But you can stop pretending you're the only one our parents hurt, I said. He looked up and for the first time, I saw it, the guilt, the regret, the deep ache of a man who had finally realized he was just another pawn in someone else's game. Yes, he'd made choices. Yes, he'd caused pain. But he hadn't created the rules. He just learned to survive in the system that rewarded him for staying sick. We talked for over an hour. Not as friends. Not as siblings. But as 2 people who finally stopped lying to themselves. I told him I wasn't ready to forgive. That forgiveness wasn't a reset button and trust wasn't a gift, it was something earned. And to his credit, he didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just nodded and said, whatever you're willing to give me, I'll take it. Even if it's nothing. When we stood to leave, he offered a hug. I paused, then shook his hand instead. And in that moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, that was enough. But the second I walked out the door, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. From my father. His voice? Ice cold. You've torn this family apart. You're poisoning your brother. If you don't stop this, I swear it. I deleted the rest without listening. Because suddenly, I knew the storm wasn't over. It was just getting started. There's something uniquely chilling about hearing your father's voice not as a parent, not even as someone hurt or disappointed, but as a man issuing a threat, controlled, deliberate, laced with a kind of bitterness that felt too rehearsed to be born of real emotion. That voicemail echoed in my head all night. You've torn this family apart. Funny how people say that right after the truth finally surfaces. I didn't respond. Didn't call back. But the silence didn't last long. 2 days later, Jamie came home from work with this look on his face like he was trying to protect me from something just by how gently he closed the front door. He handed me his phone and said, you should hear this. It was a voicemail left on his work line, my father again. Same tone. Same venom. This time accusing him of corrupting me, saying that if Jamie had any decency, he'd fix this rift before it destroyed my reputation, my marriage, my future. Jamie played it twice just to make sure I caught every word. I stood there, frozen, while he paced behind me, hands in his pockets like he was holding back everything inside him that wanted to unleash hell. And that's when we made the decision, we were going no contact. I blocked both of my parents on everything, phone, email, social media, even sent a polite but firm message to a few extended relatives saying I wasn't looking to mediate or justify anything anymore. The damage had been done. I wasn't going to explain my pain to people who had ignored it for years and suddenly decided they were entitled to judge how I healed from it. Jamie's family, bless them, circled around us like a shield. His mom brought over food. His sisters dropped off flowers with a handwritten card that just said, we see you. We love you. You're not alone. I cried for an hour after reading that. Not because I was sad, but because I finally felt seen in a way I never had growing up. But then something else happened. Something I didn't see coming. My aunt, the same one who'd called to shame me after the wedding, reached out again. This time, it wasn't to defend my parents. She asked to meet for coffee. I was hesitant, but something in her voice cracked in a way that sounded different than before. Honest. When we met, she didn't waste time. I owe you an apology, she said. I've known for a long time that your mom made everything about Neil. We all did. We just thought it wasn't our place to say anything. I asked her why no one ever did. She looked down at her hands, fingers curled around the edge of her mug. Because we didn't want to start a war. And because we thought you were strong enough to handle it. That last part stung more than it comforted. She told me about the time I'd been offered that promotion at work and announced it at a family dinner, and my mother interrupted to brag about Neil landing a part-time grocery store job. I remembered that night. I remembered how small I'd felt. How fast the table shifted focus from my breakthrough to Neil learning how to use a price gun. My aunt said she had stayed silent out of guilt and fear, but after hearing what Kay found, after hearing about Neil's confession, she couldn't do that anymore. Your parents are still saying you orchestrated all this. That you manipulated Neil. That you poisoned him against them. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so painfully on brand. They always needed a villain, and when Neil stopped playing their game, they just made me the mastermind. That night, after I told Jamie everything, we sat on the couch in silence for a long time. He finally broke it with a question that hit harder than I expected. What kind of relationship do you want to have with your brother, now? I didn't have an answer, because part of me felt a flicker of hope that maybe we could build something from the ashes, but another part still carried every wound he helped cause. And even if he was finally breaking away from the pattern, I wasn't sure that erased the years he spent helping enforce it. Then, like life wanted to test me, another message came in. This time from Neil. He had officially moved out of our parents' house. Said he'd found a small place across town, finally landed a full-time gig in accounting, and was trying to piece things together on his own. He said he wasn't reaching out to force anything. Just to say thank you for meeting him, for hearing him, and for not turning his apology into a weapon. And he ended with this. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to earn it, however long that takes. I stared at that message for a long time, thinking about what it really meant to rebuild trust, not just with him, but with myself. Because before I could even consider forgiving Neil, I had to forgive myself for all the years I stayed silent, for believing I was unworthy of attention, for swallowing disappointment like it was normal. I didn't respond right away, but I knew I would. Eventually. You'd think that once the truth's out, the weight lifts, the clouds part, and everything gets easier. But the truth? It's just a doorway. And once you step through, you realize the hardest part isn't getting people to admit what they did, it's figuring out what you're supposed to do with the pieces they left behind. I kept Neil's message unread for 3 days. Not because I was ignoring him, but because I needed to hold onto that moment of pause, that quiet in-between where the pain hadn't yet turned into a decision. It's a strange thing, being hurt by someone who's also been hurt. You don't know whether to hug them or build a higher wall. Jamie gave me space. He didn't press. But I knew he was watching me out the corner of his eye, like he could feel me drifting through the old memories, trying to decide whether I was ready to let any part of my brother back into the world I'd built without him. And then the knock came. It was a Saturday morning, overcast, cool, and I just sat down with coffee when there was a knock at the front door. Jamie and I both froze. We weren't expecting anyone. And after everything with my parents, any unannounced visit made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Jamie went first, looked through the peephole. He turned back to me, jaw tight. "It's your mom." I didn't move. He asked, gently, "Do you want me to open it?" I shook my head. I didn't want to hear her voice. Not after the threats, not after the lies. But part of me knew if I didn't open the door now, she'd keep coming, like a ghost refusing to stay buried. So I opened it. She looked disheveled, not in the put-together, commanding way she always tried to present herself. Her hair was unbrushed. Her sweater was wrinkled. She looked like someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. I didn't say anything, just stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, waiting. Her first words weren't an apology. They never are. "You've turned Neil against us." There it was. No hello, no regret. Just accusation straight from the script she'd always used. "He told us you poisoned him," she said. "Told us you twisted his mind with therapy and guilt. And now he's left us." I didn't flinch. I'd spent too many years under her thumb to be shocked anymore. "No," I said. "He left because he finally saw the truth. And I didn't twist anything. You did that on your own." She started crying then. Not the loud, performative kind I remembered from childhood, but quiet, leaky tears that almost made her human for a moment. "I don't know what to do without him," she whispered. "He was everything." I let that silence stretch between us, heavy and real. And then I said, "And what was I?" She didn't answer, couldn't. "Because for years," I continued, "you told me to be strong, to understand, to wait. Every time you bailed on me, every time you made my achievements feel like inconveniences, you said I was just more independent, that I didn't need you the way he did. I thought I was doing the right thing," she said. "He was sick." "No, he pretended to be sick, and you needed him to be." Because it gave you a purpose. And I just reminded you of everything you weren't willing to give. She begged me then, not to forgive her, but to fix it. Just talk to him. Tell him we didn't mean to push him away. Tell him we were trying to protect him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You weren't protecting him, I said. You were protecting the version of him you needed him to be. And now that he's grown out of it, you don't know what to do with yourself. Her face twisted in a kind of desperation I hadn't seen before. Please, she said, help us. It took everything in me not to slam the door right then. But I didn't. I stepped back, looked her in the eye and said, I spent my entire life asking you to show up for me. Just once. And every time you left. This is me finally learning to leave too. And then I closed the door. She stayed there on the porch for another minute. I could hear her breathing through the wood. Then her footsteps faded. That night I opened Neil's message again. And I wrote back. I told him I appreciated the honesty. That I saw the effort. That I wasn't ready to rebuild what we never had. But I was willing to start from scratch. As long as it was real. As long as there were no more shadows. No more episodes. No more excuses. He responded in minutes. I'll take real. Even if it's awkward. Even if it's slow. And for the first time I believed him. But I also knew one thing. My parents weren't going to go quietly. And they weren't done trying to control the story. If there's one thing I've learned about people like my parents, it's that silence only sharpens their need for control. When they can't get you to react, they don't reflect, they escalate. And that's exactly what happened in the weeks that followed shutting that door on my mother's face. Started small. Emails. Long-winded ones from my dad filled with phrases like, after all we've done for you, and we were only trying to be good parents. The tone was equal parts guilt trip and self-indication. Like if they could dress their negligence up in the right adjectives. Maybe I'd forget the birthdays spent alone or the cold stares across dinner tables where my accomplishments were brushed aside like lint. Then came the calls to Jamie's work. My father demanding updates. Saying things like, she's not thinking clearly, or you're her husband. It's your responsibility to guide her back to reason. Jamie, bless him, kept his composure, but I could tell each call was testing the boundary between calm and fury. Then one night, while we were cleaning up after dinner, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of my childhood home, taken from the sidewalk. Below it, don't forget where you came from. I should have been scared. But honestly, I just felt numb. Because what they still didn't understand, what they refused to understand, was that I hadn't forgotten. I remembered everything. Every letdown. Every lie. Every time they convinced me I didn't matter as much as Neil because he needed them more. But now that he'd stopped needing them, their world was unraveling. So I called my lawyer. I explained everything. The texts. The work calls. The drive-bys. And together we filed for a protective order. Not out of fear, but out of finality. I needed a line they couldn't cross anymore. One they couldn't guilt or manipulate their way around. Word got around the extended family pretty quickly. Some relatives reached out to say they supported me. Others, well, they accused me of destroying the family. I didn't respond. I was done arguing with people who only wanted peace when it meant my silence. Neil, though, he kept showing up. Not physically, but consistently. He'd send updates. Tell me about his new job. Ask questions not just about logistics or facts, but me. What books I liked. What kind of music I listened to during college. Things a brother would know if he'd ever asked before. I kept my responses short but honest. We met once more. At a bookstore of all places. Talked for almost 2 hours about everything but the past. It wasn't warm. It wasn't easy. But it was honest. And maybe that's more valuable than affection sometimes. When he asked about our parents, I told him the truth. They want me to forget, I said. But forgetting is how they survived. I'm not trying to survive anymore. I'm trying to live. He nodded, eyes glassy but steady. I don't want to be like them, he said. I want to do better. I believe you, I told him. But doing better means not just being different from them. It means repairing what you helped break. That night, I got home and found a package at the door. No return address. I opened it slowly, unsure what to expect. Inside was a photo album. It was old, covered in dust and corners frayed. I recognized it instantly. It was the one my grandmother had made during my childhood. I hadn't seen it in over a decade. On the first page was a sticky note. My aunt's handwriting. Found this in your parents' basement. Thought you deserved to have the memories they chose to ignore. I flipped through the pages slowly. There I was, beaming in a science fair ribbon, playing piano at the winter recital, holding up my college acceptance letter with tears in my eyes. Photos no one ever displayed in the house. Moments they never bragged about. It was proof that I had existed, that I had achieved, that I had been worth celebrating. And now? I finally had it in my hands. That night, I sat on the porch with Jamie, album in my lap, his hand in mine. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The quiet between us wasn't heavy anymore, it was whole. I've learned something through all this. Sometimes the family we're born into becomes the battlefield we spend our lives escaping. But other times, if we're lucky, we find a different kind of family, one built on truth, respect, and choice. I didn't get the parents I deserved, and I may never have the brother I always wanted. But I do have something now that I fought hard to earn. Peace. And I'm not giving it up for anyone, not ever again.